Last winter, my daughter called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked me why I never wanted to come over for Sunday dinners anymore. I told her the truth. My name is Margaret Elaine Holloway. I'm 79 years old, and I've spent the better part of the last 2 years quietly learning that staying home is not something I need to apologize for. But the guilt took a very long time to let go of. And I think a lot of you know exactly what I mean. I was not always like this. I want you to understand that from the very beginning, because I don't want you to think this is a story about someone who gave up on the world, or who became bitter, or who stopped caring about the people she loves. That is not what happened to me. What happened to me is something much quieter than that, and I think much more honest. For most of my life, I was the kind of woman who kept the door open, literally and figuratively. I raised 4 children in a 3-bedroom house in western Pennsylvania, and that house was never, not once, empty of noise or need or motion. My husband Gerald worked at the mill during the week and coached Little League on Saturdays, and I was the one who kept everything running underneath all of that. The meals, the doctor's appointments, the school fundraisers, the neighbor's kid who needed somewhere to sit after school because his mother worked a double shift. I was the yes. I was always the yes, and I loved it. I want to be fair to my younger self and say that I genuinely loved it. I was not a martyr. I was a woman who found her purpose in motion, in need, in the particular satisfaction that comes from a full house and a full calendar. My identity was woven so tightly into being available that I could not have told you back then who I was when nobody needed anything from me. I had never had to find out. Gerald passed in 2014. That was the first earthquake, not the end of the world, because we had a long marriage and a good one. And I had time to prepare in the way that you prepare for something you know is coming, but still cannot quite believe will arrive. Grief is strange that way. You think you are ready, and then it lands on you like a physical weight. And for months, you simply carry it room to room and wonder when it will get lighter. What I did not expect was how the world would respond to my being alone. My children were attentive at first, which I appreciated. They called often, they visited, they invited me to things with a kind of determined cheerfulness that I recognized as love, even when it exhausted me. Friends from church would stop by. The neighbor across the street, a woman named Patricia, who I'd never been particularly close to, suddenly became a regular presence, dropping off casseroles and sitting in my kitchen with that careful look people give you when they are watching for signs of something going wrong. And I understood all of it. I did. I knew it came from love. But somewhere inside me, underneath the gratitude and the grief, there was this very quiet, very unfamiliar sensation that I could only describe now as relief. Relief at the silence. Relief at the empty chair. Not because I did not miss Gerald, I missed him terribly, but because for the first time in over 50 years, I did not have to be anything for anyone from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. I did not tell anyone that. It felt shameful. It felt like a confession that would frighten people who loved me, that would make them think the grief had done something to my mind. So I kept it to myself, and I kept saying yes to the Sunday dinners and the birthday parties and the grandchildren's school plays and the neighborhood association meetings where everyone talked too loudly and the food was always lukewarm. But I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that lives in your chest and asks you, quietly but persistently, why you're still performing. I should tell you something about my body, because I think that is part of this story that people often leave out when they talk about getting older, as though the body is an inconvenience rather than a messenger. By the time I was 75, my knees had made it very clear that they had opinions about stairs. My hearing in my left ear had gone soft, which meant that every crowded room became a kind of endurance test, a constant effort to track conversations that moved too fast and overlapped in ways that left me nodding at things I had not actually heard. I started coming home from gatherings with headaches that took a full day to fade, and still I went. Because that was what you did. Because to stay home was to give in to something, to admit to a weakness, to become one of those people, the ones who had retreated. I had spent my whole life being the opposite of retreating. The idea that I might choose my own couch over my granddaughter's piano recital felt like a moral failure. It felt selfish in a way I could not reason my way out of. The shift happened slowly, the way most important things do. My youngest daughter, Caroline, she is the thoughtful one, the one who reads books about psychology and brings them up at dinner in ways that make her siblings roll their eyes. She said something to me about 2 years ago that I have not been able to stop thinking about. We were sitting in my kitchen, just the two of us, and she had noticed that I looked exhausted after a family gathering the day before. She said, "Mom, do you actually want to come to these things, or do you come because you think we need you to?" I told her that was a ridiculous question. I told her, of course, I wanted to come. She looked at me the way she has looked at me since she was about 11 years old, which is to say, she looked at me with a patience that was almost inconveniently perceptive, and she said, "I am not asking if you love us. I know you love us. I am asking if you want to be there." I did not answer her right away. I picked up my coffee cup and I looked out the window at the bird feeder in the backyard that Gerald had built in 1998 and that I had repainted twice since he died. And I sat with that question in a way I had never let myself sit with it before. The truth was no. Not always. Not the way I used to, and that no, small as it was, felt enormous. It felt like something breaking open rather than something breaking down. What I began to understand, slowly and with a great deal of internal argument, is that somewhere along the way, the world had changed its relationship with me without telling me. I had spent my life in a role that was built on being needed, and I'd been so good at that role, and I had found so much meaning in it, that I had never stopped to ask whether the role still fit. My children were grown. My grandchildren had 2 parents and full lives, and teachers and coaches and friends. They loved me. They wanted me at their events, but they did not need me the way my children had needed me when they were small, and the world was something I could protect them from with my own 2 hands. The needing had changed, and so the giving had to change too. But no one had told me I was allowed to change along with it. That is the guilt, isn't it? That is a specific guilt I want to talk to you about, because I think it lives in a lot of people over 70 who have spent their lives as the ones who showed up. The guilt is not really about staying home. The guilt is about changing. The guilt is about admitting that the shape of your love has shifted, that you love your family just as deeply as you ever did, but that you express it differently now, that a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon can hold as much tenderness as a presence at a dinner table, that writing a card in your own handwriting and leaving it in the mailbox can be its own kind of devotion. But we have been taught, those of us who came up in a certain generation, that love is demonstrated through sacrifice of comfort, that love means showing up even when showing up costs you something. And there is truth in that. There is real truth in that. But it is not the whole truth. The other part of the truth, the part that took me until my late 70s to begin to understand, is that you cannot keep making withdrawals from a self that is no longer being replenished. You cannot keep giving from a place of depletion and call it love. At some point, it becomes something else. It becomes performance. It becomes obligation dressed up as devotion. And the people you love, if they're paying attention, can feel the difference. I started staying home on purpose about 18 months ago. Not every time, not to the point of disappearing, but intentionally. When my body said it needed rest, or when my mind said it needed quiet, I stayed home. And I stopped apologizing for it, which was actually harder than the staying. The first few times I told Caroline I was going to skip Sunday dinner, I could hear the worry in her voice even when she said the right things. I could hear her calculating whether this was grief or decline or some early sign of something she should be concerned about. And I understood that. I did not blame her for it, but I also held my ground because I knew the difference between choosing rest and surrendering to it, and I needed her to trust that I knew that difference too. What happened over those 18 months surprised me, and I think it might surprise you too. I started sleeping better. I started reading again, really reading, the way I used to when the children were young, and I would stay up too late with a novel because the story had hold of me, and I could not put it down. I started cooking for myself with care, which sounds like a small thing, but it is not. Because cooking for yourself with care is an act of self-regard that I had never really practiced. I made things I liked. I ate at the time that suited me. I sat by the kitchen window in the morning with my coffee, and I watched the cardinals at the bird feeder, and I did not rush toward anything. And here's what I want to tell you. The part that feels most important. I started enjoying the time I did spend with my family more, not because they had changed, but because I had stopped arriving as someone who was already running on empty. I stopped coming to Sunday dinner as a performance and started coming when I genuinely wanted to be there, which meant that when I was there, I was actually there. I listened better. I laughed more easily. I was present in a way that I had not been for years because I was not saving any part of myself for the drive home or the recovery day after. My granddaughter Emma, she is 13. She told me last spring that she likes talking to me because I actually listen. She said it so matter-of-factly, the way teenagers say things that land like something you should write down. And I thought about all the years I had showed up in body but not entirely in spirit, all the gatherings I'd attended while quietly managing my own exhaustion. And I thought that maybe staying home when I needed to had in some strange way made me more present when I arrived. There's something else I want to say. 'cause I think it needs saying and not enough people say it. Your home at this stage of life is not a retreat from living. It is where your living happens. The books on the shelves that you have been meaning to return to. The garden that asks nothing from you except attention. The photographs on the mantel that are a whole history in frames. The chair by the window that knows the exact shape of you. The routines that hold the days together in a way that feels, when you're honest about it, like a kind of grace. None of that is less than the world outside. In many ways, it is more. It is the accumulated evidence of a life you built, and you are allowed to inhabit it fully. I'm not telling you to stop going. I'm not telling you to pull away from the people who love you, or to let the days blur into sameness, or to stop reaching toward things that interest and delight you. What I am telling you is that the reaching does not have to hurt, and the staying does not have to mean giving up. You spent decades building a self that was defined by what it gave. That self deserves now to be known on its own terms. Not as the grandmother, not as the neighbor who always showed up, not as the one who held everything together, but as a person who has a right to quiet, a right to rest, a right to a Tuesday afternoon with no agenda except to sit in the good light by the window and simply be. I think about Gerald sometimes when I'm in the garden. I think about the particular way he would stand at the back door with his coffee in the morning, just looking out at the yard with that comfortable satisfaction that I used to find puzzling and now understand completely. He was not waiting for something. He was not wishing he were somewhere else. He was just there, fully, in the morning light, in the yard he had made his own. I think he knew something that took me longer to learn. You are allowed to be where you are. You are allowed to love the people in your life from the particular place where your life has landed. The guilt that tells you otherwise, that whispers that staying home is selfishness, that choosing rest is weakness, that love must always cost you something to count, that guilt is not wisdom, that guilt is just an old habit that has not yet been given permission to retire. I am giving it permission. And if you need someone to give you that same permission, then I am doing that now. My name is Margaret Elaine Holloway. I am 79 years old. I'm sitting in my kitchen with my second cup of coffee, and the cardinals are at the feeder, and the morning is quiet, and everything for the moment is exactly right. That is enough. You're allowed to believe that it is enough, too.